Okay, everyone, we're continuing our surface, what are we calling this thing? Surface decoration boot camp. And so far you've probably made your own stamp or rolling stamp. You've used some found materials to press in stamps such as this mat, fabrics, leaves, etc. And then we've worked with low relief sculpture. And those are all manipulating the surface of the clay. And now we're going to move into working with glazes. And we're going to be working in this next few on greenware, meaning the clay has not been fired yet. It's getting quite dry, so I can't really bend this much, and but it has not been fired yet. So this is called greenware, and we're going to be working with two kinds of underglazes. The one I recommend is called velvet. This is meant for the temperature that we fire to, and we also have a series of glazes called lug glazes. They're the same thing. Sometimes those colors don't turn out quite as well because we're firing to a higher temperature than intended, but they'll work out for the most part. Underglaze is essentially the color part of the glaze without the glass, the shiny part into it. And we're gonna, so just imagine this is just the color. We'll be applying that to the surface, letting that dry. I'll show you the technique in a little bit. And then we'll be applying the clear coat glazing aspect of it when it's done. Anytime you get a glazed container, you're gonna wanna shake this really well. Some of the heavy particulates will settle to the bottom, particularly the color parts, and so you want to give this a really good shake. This happens every semester, so please pay attention to this. You want to stick your fingers over the cap. A lot of times these caps weren't put on great and they have a tendency to fall off. It's also not a bad idea to do this over the sink. So pay attention. Basically don't want the cap to fall off. This happens every semester, it flies off and it always gets on the person next to you and never the person that wasn't paying attention to the directions. So cover your cap, give it a really good shake, and spend some time really shaking this up. Mix all that color around, like so. All right, I'm gonna be working with two colors today. I'm trying something new. I'm gonna kind of go like a sort of ombre on my piece. We'll see if it works. When you do choose a color, you do want to work with a high contrast color. Even though our clay looks gray right now or kind of dark, this is going to be the white part of this fires to white. And so the glaze or the underglaze you'll be adding should be darker, quite a bit darker than white. So go with darker colors. I'm going to go with a maroon and a straw color. I've actually not used these before, so we'll see what happens. In my case, I'm going to be mixing these colors, so I don't want to stick my glaze brush back into the container when I'm done. So I'm just going to pour, I'm not going to need much here. I'm going to pour a little bit into a paint tray. And if this mixes with another color, I'm basically not going to pour that back into the container. You don't have to do this. I'm just getting a little extra here today because I can. All right, what I'm thinking is I'm going to have maroon on the top of the tile, and basically it's going to start fading down as we go down. In the glaze shelves, you're going to find glaze brushes. This is my favorite. There's all kinds in there, but this is definitely the one I think works best for this. Glaze brushes can absorb a lot of this liquid up, different than our acrylic painting brushes. Make sure you clean these really well when you're done. There's nothing worse than grabbing a brush, starting to paint on a glaze on your piece and realize someone else didn't wash it and that color is getting your piece. So wash them out really well, then return these to the glaze brush container located on the other side of the room from the sinks. This will require a few coats of glaze, and I find that the first one often doesn't go on that well. Clay is wet, it's not the stickiest of surfaces. So your first coat might kind of be streaky. Really lather, I should say lather, you want to put this down fairly thickly. We're not trying to dry brush this on. We're really trying to lay a fairly thick layer on. I'm going to start adding some more of this yellow in. And basically just trying to fade this down. I should also mention that this tile, before the video, I really made sure that the surface of the tile was really smooth. I worked on it for a while with a rib tool, and I worked on my edges. Because I'm not manipulating the surface of this one too much, I'm not going to have opportunity to change that much in the end. So I really wanted to make sure that that was dialed in before I got this project going. All right, this is layer 1. We're going to do probably 3 layers. Maybe you could get away with 2, but I think 3 is going to be best. And in order for this to work right, we're going to need this to dry all the way prior to us putting our next layer on. So what I recommend is just letting it sit on the air if there's some class time left, going to work on your next project, doing some planning, updating your Google Sites, whatever you need to do. If you need to, there are heat guns, and you can hit this up with a heat gun if you need to. It works. Sometimes the glaze can tend to dry too fast and have some problems. So best if it air dries. If you're in a hurry, hit it up with a heat gun. I'll come back in a little bit. I'll probably finish all 3 coats, and we'll come back to this video for the Sgraffito aspect of this when this is ready. All right, at this point, I have put 3 coats on, and it's very close to dry. You notice it's all dull. Frankly, it's probably a little bit wet here yet, but I'm kind of in a hurry to get this project done today, so I'm going to move forward. If there's any damp spots, they'll show up as shiny. You definitely don't want to move forward the project at that point, but this looks pretty good. I don't mind the streakiness that I mind because I'll be working on something I want to look kind of natural or organic. But if you're working on a solid color, you definitely want this to look like it's all one color. All right, from a prior project on relief sculpture, I was using this Appalachian Trail logo, and I've just adapted this a little bit towards this project. We're going to be working on Sgraffito, and Sgraffito means to scratch. So I'm going to transfer that to this tile now, and I'm going to remove or scratch away anything that I want to look white or the color of the clay, leaving the glaze in the areas I want to. In this case, even though this is maroon and yellow, the black here represents what will be the glaze color in the end. A couple things about Sgraffito. First of all, if about half of your material is left and half is carved away, that tends to be a pretty good balance. If you carve away 90% of the material, there's just not much left. If you leave 90% of the material, it's just too much. So I recommend in the 50-50 range of carving out and leaving. Secondly is patterns can work really well. So you notice here in that second range of mountains, I just put a pattern there. And this is very, if you've ever done a relief sculpture, very attuned to that. So it's either there, it's not, it's either carved away or left. So patterns or motifs work fantastic for this. I went through and I have some ideas of what I'm going to do, but I would recommend you really do a careful job of making planning because it's kind of hard to put things back. You can put a little glaze in some boo-boo areas, but essentially once you carve something out, it's gone. So make sure your plan is kind of taken into consideration. One thing I noticed as I was working is I think I want to put a white line here to separate that mountain range from this circle here. A couple other things I'll probably do as I discover it along the way. But the more you have a plan here, the more confidently you can move forward with your project. So take your time, your drawing, spend some time there and make sure it looks good. For transferring this, is similar to what I did with the relief sculpture. I'm just going to center this over my tile, and I'm going to trace over this again with a pencil. Recommend sort of a dull-ish pencil because it won't tear through the paper as bad. So kind of a dull rounded end pencil or a ballpoint pen. I'll finish this up and we'll continue when I'm done with this. At this point, I've traced over my design and put a fair bit of pressure on there. And hopefully you can see that I've transferred that pressure into indentation in the clay. And now I am ready to work. All right, Sgraffito is a word that means to scratch. I think it's Italian. To scratch is also where we get the word graffiti from. And the basic concept here is we're going to remove some of this underglaze, exposing the white clay below and leaving the areas that we want. This is my design again, and I'm going to be leaving the glazed areas that are black, cutting away the areas that are white. Tools for this project, again, our loop tools that we use in our relief sculpture. Those are great and can dig in. We have a variety of shapes of those, so check out those. A lot of people's favorite are these stylus pens. They have a little ball in the end, and we have a variety of sizes. That tends to be a favorite of people I see online and professional artists and students. I tend not to like them too much, so you can check them out. We have plenty of them. And then we also have just a lot of kind of like dental tools, scrapey tools. And these are probably some of my favorites here. You don't really have to go too deep with this. Basically just trying to scrape away a little bit of the glaze. So don't feel like you have to really dig in. We're just trying to remove a little bit of the surface. I like to work on paper again. In this case, it's not going to stick to the table because this is quite a dry piece of clay at this point. But what I want to do is I want to be able to clean up my mess here fairly easily when I'm done. So even a bigger paper than this would be great. And essentially, when I'm done with the day, I can scoop that up and bring it over the trash can and put it in the trash. The glaze we use is not toxic, but it is not great for your lungs, and we don't want to get this airborne. So again, just get it to the trash can or to the sink, sponge, clean up everything. Never blow this off when you have the crumbs. I'll show you how to clean those up in a second. Just be really aware of the fact that we're not trying to get this dust airborne. I have my plan here in the background so I can see what I'm doing, and let's start. I noticed in these videos, by the way, when I look down on my head that I have lots of bald spots that I didn't know I had, so it's a little depressing, so yeah, it is what it is. I'm using a little loop tool here, and the way that I like to get rid of the materials, I have a bunch of these fan brushes over by the glazes. We use these just for this, so really dry brush. Don't want it wet because it will smear, and you can see that I've removed a little bit of the clay there for that tree line there. Alright, next on my design, I'm going to carve away actually all this material here. And you can incorporate a little bit of texture into the carved away spaces. And in this case, my clay is a little bit wet in this area, so I am leaving some texture in there. If you work with like a cleanup tool, or your tile's actually drier than mine, you can make that background just as smooth as the glaze. So yeah, you don't have to leave a texture there if you don't want to, but it can look great. This is a nature design, so I think it's going to work just fine. All right, let's work in a bigger. I think I'm going to take out the entire A for this project. And so for that one, I'm going to use a wider loop tool as a flat end. And I'm going to tilt this so I can see it. Currently this clay, when it's wet, it looks pretty dark, and as a matter of fact, it actually looks lighter than this yellow, so it's a little deceptive. When this gets fired, this particular clay will fire to kind of a creamy yellow, really close to white, and the glaze we're using will probably darken quite a bit, so the maroon is going to be darker, hoping that the yellow will stand out from the white. I'm just kind of going with an experiment here today, so we'll see what happens. I'm not going that deep here. This is not really a relief sculpture. This is more just I'm trying to scratch this glaze. And I do like to rotate my piece around to where I have a nice angle on what I'm cutting out. All right, so those are a couple of tools. Let me show you the stylus. These have a variety of balls on the end. I'm not sure if you can see if it's focusing, but these are people really like these, and I guess you can get better detail. So they're not bad, but I tend not to use those. Again, you can figure out if you like those or not. So that remove that material from that little sun there. Okay, I'm going to continue carving here for a little bit. I'm going to try and remove about 50% of the material, and not trying to go too deep into the clay, just a little bit. Can leave the textures in the carved out areas if I want to, or I can make those smooth, and I'll be back in a little bit when this is closer. Okay, I'm getting pretty far along in my Sgraffito. You'll notice that the areas I've carved away, those are going to be white in the end, and the areas that I've left will be quite a bit darker once they get fired. I've tried to use some texture. I've tried to go for about 50% of my idea to be carved out and 50% to be left, at least on that half, which I've getting close to done. And you notice I'm working on paper. I'm going to fold this paper up when I'm done in the day, go throw it away in the trash. Everything else gets cleaned up with a sponge, water, and try not to get any of this airborne. A couple other things I want to point out. And what I did here is I made a drawing using just a Sharpie marker. And a Sharpie marker often is better to work with for your design than a pencil. In a pencil you can make gray areas, light areas, dark areas. With a Sharpie marker it's either there or not. And what I've done here is, if you can see, there's a Q in the middle there obviously. And I've divided that up into a few sections. And what I want to point out is that sometimes the object is left as white, or in this case would be carved out in Sgraffito, and the outside area is what's left, or dark. And then other areas I've left the object to be the dark and the surrounding area to be carved away. And you'll notice that I've flipped between 3 here, and you can still, your brain just knows the finished object, so it figures out that that's a Q and not 3 separate shapes. And the tendency of Sgraffito is to be carved, you want to carve away, it's easy to carve lines, and it's not easy to carve around lines. In other words, carve around both sides, leaving the line. But I think it looks great if you actually switch between sort of excising or incising or removing or leaving your objects. And so consider switching your design sometimes to leave design, sometimes carve the design away. And then also, again, just using pattern can break up some things as well. So those are some things to consider when you're working on Sgraffito. One last thing I want to add before I go here. You really want to manage your workspace. This piece of paper is way too small for me to be working on, but is kind of lazy, and I've been working on these all in a row, so I just use the same piece. What can happen is you keep on putting your piece back down in these, what I call clay boogers. And what will happen over time is all that stuff is going to attach to your surface of your clay. So it's really easy working with a tile. It's been easy to move this out of the way. But if you're working on a piece that's already put together, this can really get in the way. A couple recommendations if you're actually working on an object is to get a piece of foam and then put plastic or a piece of paper over that foam. That way, if you're working on a certain angle, you're not going to ding up the corner. And then just always kind of keep it conscious of getting this cleaned off the side and putting your clay back down onto a clean surface each time. So keep that in mind. If a little bit gets on, you can scrape them off, but just it's a lot easier to manage your space and stay clean. That way in the end you don't have a lot to do. And yeah, it's just a good practice to try and stay clean. Okay, for cleanup, this goes in the trash, water cleanup, and we'll